Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. Despite a cold season, people across Europe do not hesitate to take to the streets to protest against the governments of Slovakia, Hungary, Serbia and Georgia. What do they have in common? To discuss the issue, we're joined by Ivana Stradner, Research Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you for accepting it. So, Slovaks and Georgians are protesting against close ties with Russia. What is the nature of the opposition movement in Hungary and Serbia?
So indeed, a lot of people in Hungary, but as well as Serbia, they are tired of the policies by Orban and Vučić, who are very much anti-Western, but also they are dissatisfied with domestic issues related to corruption and mismanagement. Specifically in Serbia, thousands and thousands of people have taken to the streets yesterday in the opposition since November, when 15 people were killed due to an accident during a train station reconstruction job. And since then, they've been constant protests on the streets of Serbia. So in large part, the protests are against the corruption and mismanagement. One thing that it's really interesting in all those countries that you mentioned, whether in Slovakia, whether in Georgia, whether in Serbia and Hungary, this is the fight for democracy. And that's actually a common theme that is happening in all four countries. I also wanted to emphasize something which is tremendously important as Putin is getting ready for negotiations related to Ukraine. He needs also to distract Europe and the West and to make sure that has some wins. And that's precisely why he has been using proxies in Europe, whether in Georgia, Hungary, Serbia, Slovakia, to rally together and support his anti-Western, anti-EU and anti-NATO policies. Just look at what's happening right now in Slovakia. I mean, Fico was very, very clear about his intention to align his policies with the Kremlin. He even threatened to organize EU Brexit, EU exit. He also threatened to continue with his pro-Kremlin policies, his visit with Putin. So, and people are of course dissatisfied because they also see in Slovakia how that would actually impact their economy, but also democracy. In Hungary, Serbia as well. Just look at what's happening in Georgia for months. Putin understands very, very well how Caucasus is important for his security. And that's precisely why the current government over there has been working very hard to pull away the country from the European path and to make sure to align its policies with Moscow. Just with the latest law on foreign agents. I mean, this is right up like a Putin's playbook. So
yes, there's something. However, I fail to understand. Did you just say that Putin has installed his proxies in such countries as Slovakia only to cause some commotion now that he's about to negotiate the peace in Ukraine?
So I didn't say that he installed any of those leaders, but he has been using very much influence operations in all those countries to polarize them further, to make sure that there are nationalistic voices that can actually serve his agenda. So if you look at the war in Ukraine only through the lenses of Russia's aggression over there, it's a very narrow view. I think it's very important to understand that this war for Putin is democracy versus autocracy, and that's precisely why proxies in Europe, whether in Georgia, Serbia, Hungary, or Slovakia, are serving his interests to further polarize Europe, to further make sure that all those countries that are not in alignment with EU policies, that they are far from NATO, and that there are always domestic unrests organized by his proxies also that can serve his domestic policies. Recently, right now in Serbia, Russia already claimed that the West is plotting to disrupt the government, but also to cause additional chaos in the Western Balkans. This is a typical narrative that Moscow has been spreading in the region, and I'm not surprised that something might actually again erupt in terms of escalation. This is Russia has been operating through its proxies in Serbia for a long time, and we already saw numerous escalations conducted by Serbian President Vučić, whether in whether in places such as Bosnia and Herzegovina or Kosovo, through hybrid warfare activities. And Russia is already...
We've already heard this narrative in Georgia, right, about the so-called party of war, of a global conflict, right? We get the same message from Robert Fico, who's also accusing the opposition of being funded by some foreign agents, right? They want to topple him on the orders from the outside. Alexander Vučić says, quote, "Our people know, my people know that Serbia is attacked from outside and inside," right? So it all creates this sort of a narrative that, in fact, you know, there's some conspiracy against all these countries we've been talking about.
You're absolutely right, because one of the key narratives that Putin has been putting in Russia is that threat has been trying to organize a color revolution for a long time. And he has exported that narrative in all of those countries. And there is really a common theme, because this is not the first time, actually, that, for example, President Vučić accused the West of organizing a color revolution. Even last year, he stated that he received information from a sister, what he calls Sister Secret Service, talking about Western color revolution. There are numerous plots, basically in the newspapers, even the accused Croatia now being involved. The same thing is in Slovakia, as you just mentioned. Fico just stated that this is a plot to organize a coup against his government, both internally and externally. So this whole narrative about color revolution is the one that it serves as a powerful influence operations, basically to disrupt and to scare people internally. The good news is that I actually think that people understand, more and more people understand that this narrative is just a conspiracy theory, and they are not falling into this. And the last piece of that whole thing is to try to escalate things and to scare people that a potential, to put in a quotation mark, civil war, civil unrest is on the horizon, which is absolutely not accurate in any of those countries. But that's a typical narrative coming from authoritarian leaders who have only one goal, which is to remain in power for as long as possible.
Robert Fico and Viktor Orban have declared themselves mainstream politicians upon Donald Trump's inauguration. So can they really count on Donald Trump's full support, given the fact that Donald Trump is about to enter a warpath with the Kremlin?
So they're hoping to achieve that by selling the narrative that they are conservative leaders who share spiritual, moral, and traditional values as conservatives, as American conservatives. But there is also an issue. We already know very well that Trump is about to start negotiations with Russia, and Trump is very much opposed to Chinese activities in the United States and elsewhere. And Orban has been, for a long time, a very close ally by Putin, but also a close ally of China. So with friends like Orban, we do not need in Washington enemies, as I usually like to say. The same thing is with Fico, the same thing is with Vučić, who are trying actually to portray themselves as traditional spiritual and moral conservatives who share the values of American conservatives. But actually, I doubt that this time that Trump is going to fall for that, not only because he doesn't believe in those values, but also because Trump is very busy with domestic issues and other larger issues.
Right. I'd like to continue that. Salome Zurabishvili, the former president of Georgia, said she would urge Trump to tell Russian President Vladimir Putin in any future call or meeting, quote, hands off Georgia, hands off the Caucasus. Now, given the recent rift in relations between the current government and Tbilisi and Washington, do you think that Donald Trump will hear her call at all? Is Donald Trump interested in Caucasus or rather in America's domestic issues, as you just said a moment ago?
I think there are a lot of conservatives actually who support Georgian democratic path. A lot of them. And I think the Trump administration understands very well the importance of Caucasus in terms of security interests of the United States, but also of Europe, and actually why Putin cares about that. So that can be also a very important leverage that Trump can also use during negotiations, because if Trump doesn't believe that we should support democracy in Georgia for purely altruistic reasons, the Trump administration should understand that this very much serves American national security interests as well.
And lastly, I'd like to ask you about the protests in a rather general questions. Now, can peaceful protests, because those are all peaceful protests, change anything? I mean, can you reason with authoritarian regimes by organizing peaceful protests?
We already experienced in the past that peaceful protests actually altered and changed the governments. So what is going to happen with all those protests, I really don't know. But I don't have a crystal ball to predict something like that. But having such protests is extremely important because, as I mentioned, for Putin, this war in Ukraine, it's not only about Ukraine. It has a much larger idea about installing autocratic regimes in terms of also what he likes to call making a multipolar world and completely disrupting the European Union, NATO, our alliances between Europe and the United States. So for that particular reason, it's extremely important to have all those protests who are the pillars of protecting democracy in Europe.
Protests as the pillars of protecting democracy in Europe. Beautiful. I liked it. Ivana Stradner, research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, was our guest tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for much more here on TVP World.